So this is a watercolor class that we do step by step, not to think that anybody needs to do anything perfectly. We are not about perfection. We're just about being together as a class, learning, trying some new techniques. We're going to do some leaves today, which aren't on your picture, but they are going to be when we're finished. So the sketch was drawn. You were sent the sketch. Hopefully you've been able to draw that. And we're ready to go. So I'll start just the same as you with just a blank canvas and my drawn picture just with pencil. If I need to adjust, I usually start with light pencil so that I can erase. But with that, we like to get into art mode, or at least I do. It helps to refocus and get into completely enjoying this hour. So with that, we'll just take 3 deep breaths in and hold our breath at the top just for a moment, and then release fast or slow, but just drop your shoulders down when you do that. So we'll start with deep breath in and hold it and release. And a second deep breath in and hold it and release. And one more deep breath in. And just hold for a second. And release. And shoulders down, and just stretch those out a little bit so that that tension gets released. We will need for today 2 buckets of water. One I like to use for mixing or rinsing my brushes. The other I use for just clear water. So we will need clear water for today. Now someone had suggested, Marianne had suggested, she's been to some watercolor art classes, and they have suggested to her that when you have your canvas, if you wet the back first and put it on your backer board, it holds it firmly in place. I prefer to use the tape, but I may try that getting the back of the canvas wet. So it will save you some tape if you decide to do it that way. So thank you, Marianne, for that idea. And you'll need some brushes. I've got a fairly big brush. I call it a mop brush. And I've got some smaller brushes just for a few details because we are doing these birds. And you'll want some paper towel just to tap your brushes off. We won't be using the paper towel for clouds in your sky. So main color we're going to start with is ochre. So as I mentioned, we go through this step by step. We'll just do it one step at a time. If you have a blow dryer on hand, that would be good, because this next step that we're going to do after we're done this, you'll need the blow dryer. So I've got my canvas with my birds. I'm wetting my canvas completely with clear water. I'm just wetting the whole thing. So this is the fun part. You've done the hard part, drawing the picture. So now we just start and put some color on it. So I'm doing the whole thing. Now I'm going to go back and I'm going to dry my birds. At this point, I'm just wetting the whole thing. And I did say you weren't going to need the paper towel for clouds, but we are going to dry off our birds. So just use your paper towel and dry those heads and little bodies. So it's just clear water, so there shouldn't be any color on there. And their tails, if you're able to, they're pretty small. So we'll just tap that, make sure they're completely dry. You don't want any water running into them. The best thing would have been to avoid them altogether, but I didn't say that in the beginning, so my apologies. Next time I'll do it differently. So now that we've got our background wet, I'm going to use ochre. And ochre is a yellow and brown mix. If you have ochre, use ochre. If you need to make ochre, it's yellow with a little bit of brown. So I'm just going to go side to side on my canvas. And even if it's really dark, I'm not worried about it. It is going to dry 20 to 30% lighter than when I put it on. But I'm going around. So I'm going to switch to a smaller brush when I get really close to my birds, because I want to avoid them and their tail feathers. I'm just going around those birds just to avoid. The canvas is wet, so that paint will move. I'm going all the way down to the bottom. And as I said, I'm not worried about it being completely even. If it's lighter or darker in places, that's okay. It is a sky in the background. So I'm just moving that paint around a little bit. But because that background was wet, it's going to move fairly freely. And I'm going to take my little paintbrush and just paint around the outside of my birds, even the tails. So if you just want to get your brush damp with water, and then pick up some of the color that's already on your canvas, that should probably work as well. Or if you're going to get fresh, that's okay too, because your canvas is still a little bit wet, so you can still move it around a little bit. And I'm just checking my edges, and I've got a few white spots, so I'm just going to touch those up with a little bit of ochre and just blend that in. If you're done, if you've got your color on, then go ahead and use a blow dryer. So I'll mute mine so we're not getting a big noise. All right, so I'm unmuted, so hopefully you can hear me okay, and I haven't gone out with the internet. So if you're wondering if your canvas is dry, if you use the back of your hand, wherever it's cold, it might not be completely dry. And using the back of your hand rather than the front, as we have oils on our fingers. So use the back and just check and see if it's dry. And once that's dry, we can go ahead and we can start to paint. So the next color I'm using is burnt umber, which is a brown color. I'm using a fairly small brush, using a number 3 pointed brush. And I'm going to do the branches. And I'm just using short feathery strokes. I'm not trying to do one solid line. So if you don't have a totally steady hand, the short feathery strokes will help you. And branches aren't all completely even. They do have bumps and ridges. So if you're not a complete straight line, that's okay. Just doing a short feathery strokes, not trying to do a complete straight line. If you have an uneven hand or unsteady hand, The short feathery strokes will help. So you see, I'm not trying to do the whole thing all at once, just little bits at a time. So branches do have little bumps and ridges. They're not completely straight, so don't think that you need to have a perfectly straight line for your branch. If I hold it close, you'll see that it's just comprised of lots of short feathery strokes. So remember that this is just a piece of paper, unless you're using a canvas, and some people are doing canvases. So if you're using a canvas or a piece of paper, it's just that. It's not, unless you're making your own, well, we're all making our own Monet, but not to stress too much. You've got the picture, so it can be repeated. So if you're not happy the first time around, then you can repeat this. And drop those shoulders a little bit. Just relax into it. Let the watercolor do what it's going to do. Just short, feathery strokes. And we have lots of time. So these are black capped chickadees, meaning that the top of their heads are black and their beaks are black. So I'm going around that eye area. It's like a little mask on that bird. So I've deliberately gone around that eye area, left a little cutout. I'll do the same on the next bird. Go around the eye area, right out to the beak. And the same on the third little chickadee. And that little chickadee is looking up. The other ones are looking straight. Now I'll take that same black, and because they're black capped chickadees, I'm going to make the cap on the top of their head. The second one, it goes right to the beak. And then I'll fill in, if I work one bird at a time, so I'll just fill in the top of this bird's head. And I'll continue to do his little beak and the little triangle that's underneath the chest area of this bird. Now it looks like a bird. There's usually a point in our artwork where we look and we think, oh no, it's never going to look like what I want it to look like. Before we fill in their heads, that's sort of what it's going to look like. So I'm doing the chest of the other bird. It's got a little cutout there. And I'll do the top of its head as well. Still leaving that eye area open. So you can see that bird is looking back. And the third little chickadee, again, it's got that triangle on its chest. It's got a beak and a black cap And so we'll fill that in. There is a funny little spot, and that's where its eye is because it's looking backwards and down slightly. And the last guy is looking up. So I see it has that little cutout as well. All right, so I like to leave the parts that we painted alone rather than blend and mix and touch on and then try to fix something. So rather than having to fix something, I'm going to go back to my greenery and I'm going to mix ochre. And if you don't have ochre, you can mix yellow and green. So I am mixing, I'm just trying to find a way to show you. I'm mixing ochre and hooker's green. So here is my ochre and here is my hooker's green. So I'm mixing the two of these together and I'm coming up with an olive color. So that is hooker's green and ochre. If I was to mix yellow, I would get a very similar color. So I'm looking for something kind of olivey. So if you want to make a little puddle in your tray of ochre and green, it doesn't have, this is hooker's green, so it doesn't have to be this dark. Or I have sap green. If you have sap green, it's just a little bit lighter. This is green and ochre together, which will give us an olivey color. So we're going to start to make little leaves. So we're not making big leaves. We're just going to make small leaves. So a leaf can be made by 2 half circles coming together. So I've got 1 half circle, the other half circle coming together to a point makes a leaf. They do not have to be completely even in color in the center, but we're going to start to make some small leaves on our branches. So there's one. So on each branch that you've put out, we're going to put a leaf on. So I'm using this olive color. I can fill them in. I hadn't filled them in yet just to give you that outline, how to make that leaf. Some can be smaller, some can be larger. Some can be a little bit straighter on one side. So we're just filling in wherever you've got a tip of a branch. We're just adding a leaf. And you'll see when you start to do that, as you get a few leaves on, how the picture's starting to come together. Starting to develop a life of its own. And you'll also see how it's not so important about the background being perfect. It actually adds if there's a little bit lighter or darker in some spots. And if half of your leaf is dark and the other half is light, it adds another dimension to your leaf. So we can go back and do some of that before we're finished if you like. So I'll continue. I've got a few little dots down below the birds. I'm going to add a couple of leaves down there. And continuing right along past the other 2 birds. And believe it or not, we're at halftime already. So the card for today is inspiration. When you recover or discover something that nourishes your soul and brings joy, care enough about yourself to make room for it in your life. That's a quote by John Shinoda Bolen. When you recover or discover something that nourishes your soul and brings joy, care enough about yourself to make room in it in your life. Take a time out today and treat yourself to an energetic pick-me-up. That's our inspiration for the day. Thank you. So watercolor dries 20 to 30% lighter than when we put it on. So some of my leaves are likely dry. And so I'm going to go back on with the same color, my combination of ochre and green, which is that olive color. And because my green has already dried, I'm going to add just another color on half of that leaf, only half. So I'm going to get a two-tone leaf. So I'm going to choose the top half on all of my leaves. So I'm just going back through just on the top. If the leaves are facing down, I'm just going to do one half. If they're on a bit of an angle, I'm going to do a little bit more than half. The same color, it looks darker because it's fresh. The other color underneath has dried. So this is what watercolor is adding color on top of color. And even though it's the same color, because the other has dried, it will give that two-tone effect. So I haven't changed the color. It's just because the other one dried already. So I'm not doing the whole leaf, just a part. And I'm not trying to blend it in either. I'm just setting it on top, and it will dry separately from what's already there. And remember, it's just a piece of paper. Drop your shoulders, take a deep breath. So now we're going to work on the birds. Cobalt blue is a nice sky blue, so I'm not going to a cobalt blue. It's a very nice blue for sky. Ultramarine blue is a nice blue for waters. It gives that deep, it can give that deep color of waves sometimes that we're looking for. A cerulean blue or a Prussian blue have a bit of gray in them. So I'm not sure if your colors don't have exact names. If you wanted to use an ultramarine blue, just add water. We're looking for a soft gray color. We're not looking for that blue color. So we're going to go ahead. There's a little there's the top marking of a bird's feathers just under that first bird. So we're just going to put that, it is blue, but it's a gray soft blue. So we're just popping that on top of that wing for the first bird. And if you've got a number of different blues and you're not sure what to use and you've been trying all of them, you've got them in a puddle, then just add a little bit of water and it will probably give you a nice gray. So I'm not about perfection. I'm about trying different things. We're just looking for a soft blue. We're going to do the same with the bird that's sitting in front of it. So we're going to do the back feathers We can also do the tail feathers. And we'll look at that last little bird and we'll do the same. We'll give that nice soft gray. We'll come back and we'll do some more work with the feathers, but we're just looking for a base to start with and the tail feathers. It's a Prussian, but I think I've got a little bit of cerulean in there as well. So this is only a start. We are going to add some more details to the feathers. So if you can just put a soft gray or soft blue on your bird feathers, then that will be a good start. And we'll let that dry and we'll come back to that. Now I want to let that dry before I do any more. I'm going to go back to the leaves and I want to add some berries. So I like to do odd numbers, 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, rather than 2, 4, 6, 8. Our brain naturally can compute an even numbers of things. So I'm using an odd number and I'm going to use 5s or 7s depending on the size of the branch or what my eye says it needs. And I'm just going to do dots of berries. So I'm doing 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 berries on my tree. It's just a little cluster of berries just at the top. It's brilliant red, that's called. If it turns out that it looks more purpley and you want to make it look more like a purple berry, that's okay. But that's brilliant red. Now, if they're too small and they're not showing up, I can add a little dot of color on top. But I'm just looking for a little cluster of berries. And I don't want to overdo it, but I do want to add them where it's going to be very visible. So you can see that there's something bright on the trees that's attracting the birds. And I'm going to go down between the birds, between where they're sitting, and just add some little berries there for that little bird. And remember that watercolor dries 20 to 30% lighter than when you put it on. So if they've dried and they're not very bright, then you can go back on and just give a fresh dot of color. It's just the point of my brush, just a little dot. Okay, I'm going to go back to those birds. I'd like to give those birds a little bit more color on their wings. So I'm going to give some downward strokes, just going in the same direction. And even when I come to the front of the feather, I'm giving a rounded, I'm going in a rounded angle, and I'm going to use ultramarine blue with just a little bit of water so you can see that it's a little bit darker than what's there. And I'm just doing fine strokes. So I'm just adding a little bit of detail to that wing. So I know I've got my base color, but you can see now there's just a little bit of detail added to the wing. I'm going to do the same to the little bird next to it, following the natural curve of how that wing is naturally grows. And that's just ultramarine blue on top of what that light gray color that was already there. And I'm going to do the same to the tail feathers, just add a few strokes just for definition for that tail. So this too is going to dry lighter. So we'll do one more step before we're completely finished with the birds. And I'm going to do the same on this little bird at the side. I'm going to go exactly in the same direction that the feather moves and the tail feathers. So I've just got that look of layered feathers. Just on top of what I did before. I'm just adding, it'll just look like a layer of feathering on that bird. So it's a little more detailed this time, but then I'm going to let that dry as well before I do anything else. So while you're letting that dry and while the rest of us were finished with the feathers, if you're finished, we're going to go ahead and we're going to paint in that little circled dot of the eye, leaving white at the outer edges. So we just have a little eye where that cutout is. So we want that eye to be separate, and it's just a ring around that eye. And it's just a little dot or a little circle. I'm trying to hold that one close so you can see. These birds also have a soft color on their belly. And so I've put just this tiniest dot of black on my tray and added lots and lots of water. I just want the outline looking of a little gray belly on this bird. It's almost invisible, but it is a gray belly. So it just sits on there. A little bit of white still showing. Don't cover all the white. We still want white to show. I used black with just a dot of black and lots of water so that I just have a soft outline on the belly. So it's black with lots and lots of water just for the softest look of a belly. Leaving lots of white. Let your white show up. Your white's what's going to help those birds really stand out. So just a tuft of color. Drop those shoulders. Take a deep breath if you need to. So we're going to use some black, but water down your black, but not as much as you did on the belly. And we're going to put, I said we have another step with the wings. And so we're just going to put a few little black streaks in the wings and in the tail feathers. Just with a watered down black, just a little bit added. So we still want the gray, the original gray we put in there, or blue gray. We still want the blue lines we put in there to show up, but we're going to add a little bit of black just for added dimension. Just gives us a 3D effect. And with that same black, and thank you for mentioning the legs, with that same black, we're just going to pop in. It's only one bird that we can see the legs. The other two are sitting, so we can put those legs in now. And if you go back and look at your berries and they've dried and they're still not that bright, you can go back and pop some extra fresh color on there. And I haven't attached the berries to any stems. They're just sitting there, right out there in the open, not attached to anything, but our eye will naturally fill in the gap. So everything doesn't have to have a stem. If I was to put a leaf here in the middle of nowhere, I just pop one down there in the middle of nowhere. Maybe I put a couple of them. And they're not attached to anything. So I'm just doing this for demonstration. You can do it or you don't have to, but I'm just showing that if I do those leaves on there in the middle of nowhere and they don't have a branch, our eye naturally fills in that branch, even with it not being there. So when you're painting, everything doesn't always have to have a stem or be attached. So we have a few minutes left. You'll just need to decide where are you going to put your artist signature? What's it going to look like? I like to put mine as part of the picture, and I like to put it down the bottom right-hand corner. So I'm going to pop it in there, off to the side. If I were going to frame this, I would put my frame on first and look and see where my edge would be. But for now, that's where it is. And so even with doing a background and having to stop and blow dry, that's what you can do in 1 hour. So I hope you've enjoyed that picture, and I hope it's not the last time in different dimensions. Maybe you've tried something new that you hadn't before. Perhaps you've decided you like an outline. So if you want to outline some of your leaves, that might even give a whole nother dimension to your leaves. So that's another option you could do. That gives another darkness to your leaf. So that's entirely up to you. But have fun with it. Do try it again. Try something new and learn and play, practice and have fun with it.